So who am I? I'm a campaigner. I'm probably would consider myself to be a lifelong campaigner. My mum was really involved with CND and the peace movement and the anti-nuclear movement when I was tiny. So I grew up going on demonstrations, and then I was an activist for years. And I got quite frustrated with a lot of sort of hero activism, things not being very strategic, and eventually realised that campaigning was something that I could do for a job, and was very lucky to have been working as a professional campaigner for NGOs, a whole bunch of them, over the last 10 years. But then I quit my job and became a campaign consultant, which I've been doing for about the last year and a half, and I set up the training collective Organising for Change, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was a bit about my kind of personal journey to doing what I do now, and my own experience of burnout and how that kind of played out for me and where that's taken me and how I've kind of got through that. And a big part of that is setting up Organising for Change. And I'm going to be talking about how organising can support regenerative activism and transform collective culture. So that's going to be the bulk of what I hope to talk to you about this morning. So yeah, my journey. Oh, is that what's making such a noise? Okay, let's try and see if that's better. All right, I'll keep it tucked behind my ear, and I'll try not to move around too much. Okay, so yeah, I was an NGO campaigner for years, and I didn't realise how burnt out I was. And my burnout wouldn't go through kind of annual periods. I was just kind of constantly burnt out, but I never lost that sort of drive and inspiration that some people have talked about, but I would just kind of keep smacking up against the wall in a really painful way. I was making myself ill a lot. I was, finding it really, really painful to engage with my work. I got really, really frustrated that there were two things that really, really frustrated me about the campaigning that I was doing. One was that I didn't think that I was doing work that was most effective to make the change that was needed in the world. I was being constrained by all these other things, like organisational kind of pushes from different departments. And then the other thing was that the change that we were trying to make in the world, the values that we wanted to see, were not being embodied with how we were making that change. So the organisations I was working within were just replicating all of the problems that were out there in the world in the way that we were actually doing the work, and it was just a total nightmare. And yeah, I was very lucky to go on the course Mindfulness for Social Change, which is now at ULEX, but was then at Ecodharma. And it was the first time I'd been on a retreat or any kind of course like that, and it had a really, really profound impact on me. I didn't realise quite how profound it was until I went back to work, sat behind my desk, and sort of sat down and kind of started to get things done. And I just kind of realised, I had this moment where I realised that there was nothing really at work that I was doing. My colleagues and some of the people around me and the way they supported me were amazing, but mostly it was depleting. Mostly everything that I was doing was depleting of me. It wasn't nourishing of me. And a lot of that depletion came from the fact that, I really wanted to be doing a good job. I really wanted to be making a difference in a positive way, and I didn't feel like, that was possible or that was happening. I also had developed a kind of regular meditation practice, which I still have. I go on regular retreats, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who is interested in that kind of aspect of my personal transformation. But I thought that in the context of this, what would be most interesting would be talking about one of the projects that I set up. And that was the Organising for Change Training Collective. My hair's doing it again, isn't it? Sorry. It's all right. I'm going to do this. Is it just that it's moving around on my shirt as well as my...
I think maybe a handheld would just be better.
Okay. Is it really noisy? Yeah, I can do that. On? It's on? Okay, great. I actually find holding things in my hands really stressful because when I get nervous about speaking, I have a tendency to shake, and then I worry about that, and then I shake more. So if that happens, I'm really sorry. I'm hoping that by mentioning this, it might make it less bad. Oh, it's not making it less bad. Okay. Yeah. So, Organising for Change. So I set up Organising for Change with two amazing women, Kat Wall and Tatiana Garavito. I don't know if you've come across them. They're awesome. I won't go on about them now because I don't have very much time. Basically, we noticed that there was a really big movement gap in nurturing grassroots leadership in the movements that we saw. I got really frustrated that there's so much money going into campaigning for change, so much money. And to my mind, most of it seemed to be flowing through structures that were just not fit for purpose. Campaigning got very stuck in a kind of campaigning by numbers, formulaic way where you identify your policy ask and your decision maker, and maybe you set up an e-campaign. And it seemed like the really exciting things for creating social change, the kind of grassroots social movements, just weren't getting any of this attention. But there was also a really good opportunity because I'd been doing quite a lot of work on kind of community organising theory and thinking about social movements and other ways that change could be created. And I've been doing lots of kind of conferences and talks and best practice sharing workshops. And, you know, with the kind of big organising of Bernie Sanders and other stuff that had started to spread across the campaigning sector. So it seemed like there was a lot of interest and buzz in talking about organising, but people didn't really know what it was. There were lots of kind of organising being thrown into job descriptions. And so, yeah, we also saw this as a potential opportunity to change the culture of activism and kind of broader culture through this. So that's why we set up this training collective. We're currently working to constitute and get funding and to set up a community of practice. But we've run 3 of these intensive training weekends so far. We've trained about 75 activists. We charge on a sliding scale, so we've had people from big NGOs, but the majority of them have come from grassroots movements. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about was how can organising transform culture and nurture regenerative activism? I see that I'm halfway through my time, so I will try to be concise. I wanted to make 4 points here, but first, basically, what is organising? What does organising mean? So for me, organising is about building and nurturing people's individual and collective agency and putting people who are affected by issues in charge of leading ways of finding to address them. And so it's kind of the opposite of some people sit down, very clever, get together, identify a policy ask, and identify what needs to happen to achieve that. It's much more about bringing people together, building kind of personal connection with each other, and building collective power. So it's a very, very different model of power. And yeah, we felt like that was really missing. So the 4 points that I wanted to make about how organising can transform collective culture are about prefiguration, which is what we've already been hearing about from several of the speakers, so how we can model the change that we want to see in the world, personal transformation and the role of that within prefiguration, stories and personal connection and how we start to rebuild community, and building power with rather than power over. So there's an opportunity with organising to build a positive culture for how we work together from the beginning. Whether you're starting from scratch and starting an organising project, or whether you're transitioning from what you're doing to organising, culture and how you're going to work together is really at the heart of that, because it's all about personal relationships. So it's an opportunity to examine how we're working to create change and to check that we're not replicating all of those problematic behaviours, structures, relationships and power dynamics that we've been hearing about today. There's a quote that I wanted to read from Richard Bartlett, who is the co-founder of the tech co-op Lumio. I just think it's a really nice piece about the importance of culture. So he said, an increasing mass of people agree that long-term human survival depends on us replacing the status quo with a fundamentally different set of behaviours and structures. I believe that the root of the challenge is essentially cultural, and that the best place to grow culture is in small groups. Until we've got a critical mass of activists that are embedded in a new way of thinking, relating, and communicating, any mass movement is going to replicate the errors of the past. That has certainly been my overwhelming experience in NGOs and in many activist circles, but it is great. it's great to see that things are changing. So I think our values need to really inform how we're making the change, as well as the change that we want to see. And then a little bit about personal transformation. So I wanted to share a quote from an eminent author and sociologist, Hari Han, who is amazing. I'd really recommend her book, How Organisations Develop Activists, if you're kind of interested in geeking out on this stuff. I can talk to you a bit about it afterwards. But what she says about movements is that movements build power not by selling people things they already want, but instead by transforming what people think is possible. And I think that's so fundamental. Assad was talking about this at the end of his talk, saying that, you know, we need to kind of have a dream, and we need to hope, and we need to believe that it is possible for things to change. And that means a lot of change happening within. So one of the things that a lot of big NGO campaigning has done is it's really amplified the voices of people who already feel quite confident that they're being listened to in the world, because they are. So, you know, in the UK, a lot of like white, middle class, well-educated people are on lots and lots and lots of NGO mailing lists. And people who are really affected by lots of issues are not. And so community organising, taking kind of organising approaches and supporting people to kind of realise their own power is the only way to address that. You need to kind of take people on a journey so that they are, you know, so that they kind of have confidence, that they have the kind of skills and the confidence that they can change things and they can be listened to. And that is hard work and takes time, but it's really, really fundamental to organising. Another of the really, really fundamental things is stories, personal connection, and rebuilding community. So, yeah, stories connect us on a much more human level. Sharing understanding about how our lives shape us and fostering empathy, and develop intimacy and form a basis for connection. If we don't know somebody's story, it's very, very hard to connect with them and see where they come from. But if we can hear someone's story, even if their experience is very, very different to ours, there'll be things that will be relatable there. There'll be some kind of immediate connection. And so we teach thinking about kind of Marshall Gantt-style story of self, and we teach how to kind of build relationships with people and find things that your story has in common with their story, and then from that, how to build a collective story, an idea of a story of us.
So meaningful solidarity is really only possible when we're kind of working together and we're building collective power, and I think it kind of challenges the rather nasty kind of power over paradigm which dominates most of the world that we live in, kind of hierarchical, forcing people to do things. So I just wanted to finish with a quote that is one of the things that's really inspired me. I've had this over my desk at every desk that I've sat at for the last few years. It's commonly attributed to an Aboriginal activist called Lilla Watson, but I actually think it might have been one of her group that said it, but it is, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that just really gets me, because I don't feel that unless all of us is free, any of us are truly free. And so working together is so important. Thank you for bearing with my wobbling and rustling.